Alright guys, it is a nice sunny hot day today, but nonetheless we are working back on the Z, and today we're going to be installing Swift Springs. So if you don't know what Swift Springs are, they're a much more street-friendly spring for PowerTrix coilovers. So you can see I've got my PowerTrix in there, and the stock coilovers, just the road and track, come with those black ones. Those are just a standard spring rate. Nothing too fancy, but there is an upgrade, which is the Swift Springs. Number one reason is that they're painted gold, so that's pretty cool. But these are also supposed to be a lot better on the road, basically. I do find that my coilovers have really decreased the comfort when driving on the road. It's something that I have not really enjoyed all that much. So hopefully these guys will help put a little bit of softness back in suspension. I don't want to say they're progressive coils because I don't think they are, but they're supposed to be a little bit softer when they need to be, and then of course firm when you need to take a tight corner or something. So obviously step one is to jack up your car. You can see I put my tire under the car just in case, that way if my jack fails, it's got something to rest on. Their stock wheel is not too big of an issue. And then a side note real quick, if you guys are using spacers, something like this, or if you put washers on your car, I want to remind you guys that these are hub-centric wheels, if you're using the stock wheels at least. So this ring right here is what the wheel actually rests on, and that's where a lot of the load comes from, and it's also where it centers itself. So if you put washers on a stock hub, what you're doing is you're pushing the wheel out, and then the wheel can't actually sit on this ring, and so you're going from hub-centric to non-hub-centric, and that's going to cause you a lot of issues with rotation, just balancing, as well as just safety. You want a hub-centric wheel on your hub-centric hub. Otherwise you need something else. You can get spacers for these if you do want to push it out, but just a side note, because I saw somebody do that the other day, and that is pretty dangerous because your wheel could just come off. But regardless, got the wheel off. Now what we're gonna go ahead and do is, if you guys remember from installing these, they're welded to the hub, right? So we're not gonna be able to like take much of this off, but what I'm gonna go ahead and do is probably disconnect the tie rod, this guy right here, or this is the tension rod, this guy, and then I'll probably disconnect the sway bar as well, and that should allow us to go ahead and unbolt the coilover from the top and have us just swing the entire control arm downwards, to the point where we can go ahead and just get these coilovers off from the top. We actually can, so they screw into this part right here, hopefully you guys can see that. This entire body and this entire sleeve are two different pieces, so if we loosen this jam nut, we should be able to lift this up and then screw out the rest of the coilover from the top. So all we need to do is lower it a little bit. So maybe what I'll do first is to disconnect the sway bar, and then just disconnect the top 3 bolts and see if that'll allow us to drop this down far enough to go ahead and just unscrew it from up here. What I'm going to go ahead and do as well is take measurements of all these gaps right here. So this gap right here, the gap between the actual spring itself, because we want to go ahead and replicate this when we put the new ones back on. This is the current ride height that I have. It's the current spring pre-tension that I have. So we're going to go ahead and just replicate all of this, just so we get back to where we were initially, and then if we wanted to modify it in the future, of course we could. So I'm going to go ahead, disconnect the sway bar, and then disconnect the 3 bolts on top, and we're going to see how far that gets us. Alright guys, so as you can see, I took 2 of the 3 nuts off on top and then loosened the other one pretty good distance. It did drop the strut down quite a decent amount, but what we're going to go ahead and do first, before we completely remove that, is we're going to go ahead and, as you can see, I've wiped off these threads with some water. You may be able to see that. They're starting to dry out now. And that's just going to help these rings move a little bit easier. We only really need this bottom one to move right now. And what we're going to go ahead and do is loosen it just a little bit. This is just a jam nut, remember. And then we're going to go ahead and take our tool. It looks like this. Little hook thing, and we're going to go ahead and put it on this top one here, and we're just going to spin the shock body like this. And what this is going to do is it's going to unscrew this entire strut assembly from this bottom coil adapter, and it's just going to let us take this piece out here instead of having to remove the whole hub and everything. So because these are 2 jam nuts, we can go ahead and do this and it won't mess up our alignment or anything. This is going to take a little bit, and then one thing I was noticing, if you have this little doodad over here zip tied, you may need to unzip tie him, just depending on what he is doing and how he is secured. because that does go through the bottom, and spinning this is going to spin him as well. So I'm going to go ahead, undo this, and we're going to see where we get from there. Alright guys, as you can see, we went ahead and got it separated. Only thing to note and look out for is make sure that your hub doesn't fall forward too much. I don't think mine could go forward much anymore because the ball joint and the tie rod are kind of keeping it where it's at. You just don't want to stress this brake hose. But as you can see, the entire shock body is now undone and out of here. I got this guy out as well. So what we can go ahead and do is just undo that one nut on top and then pull this out. And then it's going to be as simple as undoing these plates here, taking them off the bottom, taking the spring off, and then just reassembling. Remember, go ahead and take some measurements. If you guys are curious, my measurements were 155 millimeters between the plate and the plate. So the silver plate on top of it here and the silver plate on bottom here. Oh, if you guys could see that. Silver plate on top, silver plate on bottom, 155 millimeters. And then from these two rings, it was 82, I believe. So that is just going to set our ride height. We're going to use that on both sides to make sure it is symmetric, because I'm sure there's probably small variances between it. Other than that, I'm just going to go ahead, pull this out, and we'll clean everything up and get the new one installed. Alright guys, just like that, we have the entire strut assembly back in. It was actually pretty easy, nothing too crazy. I did go ahead and update my measurements just to round them off. So now this is actually 6 1/4 inches from the plate to the plate, and then this is 80 millimeters. It's just because 82 is an odd number and 155, my caliper couldn't quite reach 155, so I kind of guessed on that one. But I used a tape measure to hit 6 1/4 very easily. So that is the new measurements for this. I'm going to go ahead and do the other side, and then we're going to go ahead and move on to the rears. Alright guys, so it took me about 40 minutes to do the other front side. So if you were going to be doing this, I'd say give an hour and a half for the front, an hour and a half for the back. But let's go ahead and do the rears now. So I pulled the tire off, obviously, and I think it's pretty much going to be almost the exact same procedure. I don't remember where the sway bar connects. It's down there, if you can see it. So I think we're probably going to do the exact same thing. Loosen the sway bar so this control arm can drop down. Actually, you know, because this is underneath, we might have to... No, we can. We'll have to pull the bolt up. And then there's no shock back here, obviously. We're just going to go ahead and probably just unscrew it just like we did last time. And then, of course, inside there's 3 bolts that we have to undo. But yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and get this done. If anything new happens or if I find a better way, I'll definitely let you guys know. Alright guys, so I went ahead and got it out. Out is a relative term, of course. You may be able to see the shock body in there. So I did find a slightly easier way. You do not have to remove it from the inside. We can just pull everything out from the bottom and put it all back in. The reason I didn't do that on the fronts is because the control arm and the spindle and everything is kind of in the way. But as you can see, we've got plenty of room here. The bottom part just falls over. We got plenty of room to get things in and out. So, only recommendation I have, make sure you just, while it's still in that body and everything is kind of solid still, go ahead and loosen the 2 nuts holding on the spring. It's this big green one and then one of these small green ones. Loosen those up, get the spring completely loose, just because once this is free, it's a bit hard to hold it and turn it at the same time. But if you have it all together still, it won't want to move. So go ahead and do that. I'm going to go ahead and install this guy, and I'll leave you with some final remarks. Alright guys, so I got all of the coilovers switched over to the Swift springs and they look really, really nice. I did find a quicker way to do it in the rears. Instead of unscrewing the shock body from the lower adapter like we did in the fronts and I did on the far side, I actually just unbolted the coilover adapter from the control arm and then just undid it by hand, because it is a lot quicker to undo it by hand than it is to use those wrenches to turn the coilover little bit by little bit by little bit. So I would definitely recommend just unbolting it. I do believe it's a 17 millimeter, but I could be wrong on that. Regardless, it is all back together. I'm super happy with it. I have not taken it for a drive yet, so hopefully next video we can go for a drive and obviously just hear the sick turbo noises, but also we will do a little bit of review on the Swift springs and see what they feel like. You may note that your ride height is a little bit higher than when you left it, or when you started, just because springs need to settle. They're not going to just be ride height immediately at the start of it. So go ahead and just drive it around a little bit and it'll settle down. You'll get to ride height in a few days once the springs are kind of just, you know, broken in basically. And then you can adjust it if you need it any further. But as always guys, I hope this was a very helpful tutorial. Definitely drop any comments down below if you have any questions or comments about this swap, and I will see you guys later.